Hey, have you ever twisted your ankle before? I'm assuming the answer is yes. Most of us have done that. And it can be pretty excruciating. And it's also something that afterwards you really have to be careful as you rehabilitate, because it's tender and you're not sure you want to put weight on it. You can trust it. So the other thing about twisting your ankle is repeated twisting of the ankle actually makes it harder to feel what's going on in your ankle, which is a real problem because this joint is one of the most important joints in your body when it comes to balance. And you really want to have a flexible ankle that can deal with different kind of terrain underfoot and at the same time can still provide the stability for your upright support. So what I wanted to share with you today is a way of thinking about your ankle which allows you to look at larger patterns of movement throughout your body. Because if you twisted your ankle, many reasons that might have happened, including maybe there was just a pothole you didn't see, but it's likely that it's not just a story about the ankle. It's about your knee, it's about your hip, and it's about your spine. Could be about other things as well, but I think that's good enough. We're going to look at the three main joints of the leg as well as the spine. And what I'm going to show you here is just a series of very simple movements of the ankle and some related movements that focus more on some of these other joints. But the point is to make the movements and use each movement as an opportunity to pay attention to the various coordinations that are taking place. And I think you'll find that you can learn quite a bit and clarify a lot about the movement of the ankle. So let's begin. So we'll start with the right foot, and very simply just going to lift the heel from the floor like this and lower it. So you're going to do this a number of times, and you can see that my pace is very slow. And that's just because going slower gives the opportunity to notice more, to feel more. And as we go along, what we're going to do as we repeat the movements is we're going to move the attention. So lifting the foot like this, lifting the heel, you'll feel, of course, that the front of the foot that stays on the floor, it has to press a little bit more. Right? So that's the first point, just to feel. And as you lift the foot, you have 5 toes, of course, and so it could be that you feel the pressure more towards the pinky toe, could be that it's more over towards the big toe. So just pay attention to that. If you like, you can think of aiming the pressure a little more to the inside and the outside. But more or less, just make the movement as it comes to you. And then what's going on inside the ankle? And of course you have these 2 knobs on the outside of your ankle called the malleoli. The joint is somewhere in between, right? A joint is a space. So as you lift the foot like this, just begin to listen into that space. You don't have to have a precise understanding of the anatomy, but you can really source your attention inside the ankle. And then, of course, it's not just the ankle, it's not just the foot that's moving. The knee, you can see it, rises every time the heel rises because there's a push up through the bone of the lower leg. So you can listen to this movement from the point of view of your knee. And then, of course, the hip joint. So if you just think of the top of your leg here, the sort of crease at the top of your thigh, if you were to put your hand here as I'm doing, don't need to, but if you were, you would be able to feel that the front of the hip joint is closing, right? So this simple movement involves opening in the front of the ankle, lifting the knee, and if you pay attention, the lift of the knee is actually, well, it's interesting. In my case, it feels like it's closing a little bit, although it's quite subtle. But I would say that the back angle of the knee is closing, and then the front of the hip is closing. And if I just do these things without trying to alter it, but now I pay attention to my sit bones on the chair, I can feel in this moment that I'm sort of rocking backwards. So if I exaggerate, you can watch my head would go back. It's like I'm in a rocking chair or something like that. And what I can do also now is I can think of this movement in different ways. I can think, let me lift the knee. If I think of lifting the knee, that's a different feeling than thinking of lifting the heel, even though the result is essentially the same. And I can also think of leaning back in such a way that my heel floats up off the floor. Okay, so many ways to do one simple movement. That's probably good enough for that. You can pause for a moment. And you might just feel in all of these joints and on the two sit bones on the chair, the feeling in the spine. There might be something a little different on the side where you were making these movements. So then if you take the foot a little further out, you can do kind of the opposite movement. You can keep the heel down and lift the front of the foot. And so we're going to do more or less the same thing. Just begin to move your attention. Do a few movements and feel how the pressure moves over the back of the heel. Sense what's happening inside the ankle. Sense the movement of the knee. You'll notice the knee is going up here, just like when it was the other end of the foot lifting, but it has a distinct flavor to it. It's a little bit different. And once again, I feel that I'm actually closing in the front of my hip. Now, you have a choice, right? So I could lift the front of the foot and sort of do the rocking chair movement as I was doing before when I was lifting the heel. But of course, I could lean forward also. So I could give myself a different pattern. The movement of the foot hasn't changed, but I've changed something elsewhere. And so now maybe I'll lean back as I do one movement, and I'll lean forward as I do the other movement. And what I'm noticing is, even though what I'm asking my ankle to do is essentially the same, the feeling in the ankle is not the same when I lean forward and when I lean back. Okay, so all we've done is these two simple movements, lifting the front of the foot, lifting the back of the foot, but we've really been able to feel a number of things and have a sense of the coordination all through the right side. And of course, the left side hasn't been doing nothing. It's been providing support. Okay, so now we might just combine the two movements. I'll put my foot a little forward again, and I'll just make one movement of lifting the heel and one movement of lifting the front of the foot. And I'm just going to allow the rocking to take place in a way that feels natural to me. So as it turns out, I'm going forward as I lift the heel, I'm going back as I lift the forefoot. And maybe now I'll put my interest in the hip joint. Remember, the hip joint's not on the outside. People say put their hands on their hips and they go out here, but that's the outside of the pelvis. But in the area of the groin, that's where the hip joint is. So I listen to the hip joint, and I get a sense of the space in the hip joint. And now, as I said, I'm going forward as I lift the heel and back as I lift the forefoot. But now I could change that. I could lift the forefoot and come forward, lift the heel and go back. And so this changes the experience of my hip joint. Okay. So I'm just going to give you one last movement. You can imagine you could do all kinds of simple movements, just thinking of one joint and then noticing how things really flow through the rest of the joints. But something kind of fun you may not have tried before is to sit with only half of your pelvis on the chair. So I'm just going to scoot my chair a little bit so I can stay in the middle of the screen. But now my right sit bone is floating out in the air. And so I've only got support through the left side. Now if I do these same movements, there's even an ability for my right hip joint to sink a little down and to come a little up. And here there's also more of a sense, since the hip joint is also free, it's not stuck to the chair, it might move a little forward and a little back. So maybe I'll go with this forward and back, and you can see now my upper body, my spine is invited into turning. And I'm just turning the way that it felt most natural to do, given how the movement of lifting the heel and lifting the ankle, how it passed through my leg and how it pushed my hip joint a little forward and back. But now I can change that. So I'm lifting my forefoot and I'm turning to the right. I'm lifting my heel and I'm turning to the left. But what if I lifted my heel and turned to the right, and I lifted my forefoot and turned to the left? Very different feeling. And when you try out combinations like this, you may well say to yourself, well, I prefer that combination more than the other. But the fact is, all of these combinations are possible, right? You have quite a lot of joints in your body, and you can combine them in quite a lot of different ways. So this is just a practice of giving yourself the experience of working with the joints in a variety of ways and then paying attention. And then the thing that you can do at the end is, rather than thinking that you need to analyze the whole thing, is just to sense what can you feel more clearly in sitting. And then after you're done, you might get up and walk around. And as you see, I've only demonstrated on one side here. You can do both sides, but it's really valuable halfway through to stand up and walk around and just get a sense of, in my case, having done all these movements on the right, how does my right leg carry me? How does my left leg carry me when I'm walking, or even if I'm just standing? So in fact, I'll just stand for a moment, and what I can feel, yeah, there's a way that in this moment my weight is shifted a little more over the right leg. It just feels more solid. As I stand here, I'm going to listen to my breathing for a moment. So I sense the movement of my breathing, and now I shift over onto the other side where I wasn't doing these movements. Yeah, the breath isn't quite as full, and I feel I'm kind of sinking down into this knee. I feel a little sense of compression here. But when I come over here, no, I feel a lot of nice space in the right knee. So again, this isn't necessarily a fix for all that ails you, but I think if you play with these movements, you will learn quite a lot. And if you are still looking at some kind of trouble in the ankle, knee, hip, or spine, or elsewhere, and you'd like a little help with that, I'd be happy to do a call with you and talk it over. So I'll leave the information below how you can get in touch with me. In either case, I hope this was helpful to you, and take care.